But first, violence over the weekend has already cost the Home Secretary her job. Now the Prime Minister is believed to be weighing up how to toughen up the laws to give police more power to ban marches, as well as outlawing flags and flares, climbing on statues and bus stops, and some chants. But it's not the first time that the government has tightened up laws around demonstrations. It brought in the Public Order Act this year, which gave the police more power to clamp down on protests, lowered the threshold as well for what was considered disruptive, and brought in new protest banning orders and extended stop and search powers too. So is our enshrined right to protest increasingly under threat, is what we're asking from this government. 0207 862 2222 is the number. I mean, trying to tighten up the laws on protest twice in 1 year does seem unusual, Saleyha.
Yeah, and this was, Suella Braverman's handiwork, earlier in the year. It'll be interesting to see if the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, will continue in that vein. However, this is what Rishi Sunak has said, and it really worries me. Banning flags, banning the right to protest, these are hard fought for freedoms. I'm ex-military, I wore a uniform, I served, I was deployed, and every single year ever since, and even before that, I've marked Armistice Day, always do. And what really, really disturbed me over the weekend was this idea that you have to be one or the other. Well, I'm both. And there were plenty of people that were both. There were plenty of people who solemnly marked Armistice Day and then went on the march. But I think that this has been hijacked, and the rhetoric and the direction of travel of this, coming from Rishi Sunak, really alarms me. It will be interesting to hear, would David Cameron, now he's back, I'm going to say it, the man who brought us Brexit, who I don't forgive him for, however, would this have happened under him? I'm not sure, different styles. It really, really worries me. I've worked in countries where protests, the like that we have enjoyed, been violently shot down, and where people were desperate for the right to protest, desperate just to go onto the street, and they were killed for it. My husband's from Algeria. He told me that in his student days when they had protests in the streets, they thought it's liberty, we can go and before they knew it, they were all being shot, and he was horrified. He said, we heard these zapping noises and they were bullets. I'm not saying that that's going to be here, but what I'm saying that this is a really, really unpleasant route.
It does seem to be counterproductive, Dawn, because the more they tighten the legislation around protesting, it feels like the more protests we seem to have.
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen. I think now that Suella has gone and then we have James Cleverly. It is James Cleverly still, isn't it? I just need to check.
You just have to double check everything now.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, a week is a long time in politics. But I don't think there will be any more changes. I think the situation now will be less inflammatory. Hopefully, things will calm down. There are already enough laws in place to govern what qualifies as peaceful protest and what qualifies as a hate crime, racism, exactly, and disturbing the peace, etc., etc. So I think there's already enough legislation in place, and I think now that hopefully things will calm down and it will stay the same. We have the new legislation, and as Sally has just said, to have two lots of legislation in 1 year, it'd just be wrong.
Linda from Berkshire, what's your thoughts on this? Do we need tougher legislation to curtail protests?
No, I don't think we do. You're taking away our rights to be able to speak.
Well, what's been suggested isn't taking away your rights to protest, is it? I mean, it's taking away your right to climb on a statue. Should we be doing that anyway?
No, you shouldn't be climbing on statues, but you should be allowed to raise your flag. I mean, British people were fined for raising the British flag. That was wrong, but he didn't do anything about that. And you should have a right. You should have a right to raise your flag. This is Britain. We should be allowed to raise our flag and say our flag without being arrested. And he should be looking at things like that and looking at things like the fact that you brought the Chinese over here because they couldn't protest without being major things happen to them. Well, why did we bring them over if we're going to have the same thing here?
Well,
We
it's not.
should.
It's not
We're a
quite the same.
country.
It's not quite the same thing.
No.
How do you feel about
No,
flares?
you're not going to get. You're not going to get hurt, but you should have the right. We're known for the right to protest. We should be able to protest peacefully and say our part, because that's what. When you're angry, that's what lets that anger out. Otherwise, it bottles and you end up with anger like you had yesterday. Because this was people who were so angry with the way things have happened in this country that they wanted to speak out.
Yeah.
It's nothing, but he's bottling people up. What he's doing is he's making these new laws. The laws on racism's gone too far. He's making everything now. You can't speak, you can't move, you can't wear certain T-shirts if you're in supportive of something.
Well,
you can't raise your flag.
I actually think, Linda, that the comments coming out from Rishi Sunak and what he's planning to do was really heavily weighted towards those that were marching. The language used, he was targeting actually the larger march, not the march that was motivated by, I feel, racist sort of connotations that were around the Cenotaph. Those were I totally understand why there are concerns about being tighter on that, because, at the end of the day, there were 145 arrests made, and I was really worried for the police. Some were injured. Some were injured. And I think, I disagree with, what you're saying about being too tight on racism. I think safe protest, absolutely. Everyone has a right to speak and air their opinions. But when it spills into violence, something does have to be done about them, but it's now being all muddied with the same sort of, with putting it all together and lumping it together. But to be honest, I think Rishi Sunak seemed to be targeting the Palestinian march.
Protest. Linda, thank you for your call, though. Sarah from Liverpool, what's your thoughts?
Well, having heard the last caller, I think she's a little bit naive. I mean, yes, our right to protest is ever so slightly under threat, because since this government's got in, all they've done is every time there's been a protest, be it against Brexit, be it the strikes, be it whatever, they've always said, we've got to toughen the rules, it's all we've ever heard. You can't block anywhere off. If a protest march is going through, what are they going to do? Walk on the pavement or walk in the road? They're going to walk in the road. You can't do it. You can't do this and you can't do that. Now, over the lady who was on before, when she mentioned about the flags, the ones who were waving the flags were the far right. The ones who were causing a lot of the trouble were the far right. They're always violent. Believe you me, I've seen it. They've tried to do it in Liverpool, and unfortunately, they didn't get as far as Lime Street Station. They got thrown back. But over the protest,
so
this
Sarah,
government
should they have the right to protest?
They have the right to protest, yeah, but not the right to incite hatred. And that's what they're doing. And Rishi Sunak was saying about the Palestinians, the rally protest, his language was weighted towards them. It wasn't weighted towards those who were flying the British flag in what I would consider a rather nasty context. Because every time you see it, you think, oh, God, is it the far right again? They're bringing this country into disrepute, but our right to protest is under threat.
Sorry, I'm getting confused. I hear what you're saying, but I'm getting a little bit confused as to whether you are pro the changes that Rishi Sunak wants to make, or whether you are anti them. Should we be allowed to fly a flag? You can't really infer the connotation of a flag, because that could always be disputed by the person that's carrying it, I suppose. So you have to make a blanket rule for everyone.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, put it this way. It depends what you mean. If you're talking about a flag, say the Palestinian flag, say the British flag, or any flag of any nation, fine. But if they're talking about banners, because they could say they're a flag, especially if you look at some of the union banners, they could be considered a flag, or union flags that you see, for Unison or any of the other unions when you see a protest going through, they could include those as well. There needs to be more clarity.
I think what was concerning was the language and the rhetoric. I mean, I felt that, were we in a parallel universe, the rather big march, some say, up to 500,000 on the weekend, was largely peaceful, apart from some stupid people that are now being dealt with, thank goodness. But largely it was peaceful. The scuffles and the violence was from the opposing march, which was smaller in number. But I think no one's flags should be banned.
No,
Do we have to accept that there's always likely to be a bit of a kerfuffle with fringe individuals that are there to use a protest for their own gains or their own reasons, and we just have to sort of build that into the security, I suppose, when we're organising a protest?
Ever since we have had protests in this country, there's always been the fringe element, the idiots that ruin it for everybody else. Rent a mob, if you were. I mean, no matter what you're protesting about, you're always going to get that element that take it too far. And what's particularly annoying, and Saleyha alluded to it, is the fact that we end up talking about the tiny minority rather than the vast majority of people. I'm not even particularly talking about the Palestine march, but in general, protest marches, we end up talking about a tiny minority that ruin it, and we're not actually getting the message about what the protest is about.